I'm Angela.
And I'm Paige.
Join us as we dive into our obsession with true crime, history, and mysterious stories. We'll explore the intricate details of the corrupt, the cruel, and the calculating.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and our opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast.
Teenage sisters Barbara and Patricia Grimes begged their mother for permission to see the new Elvis Presley movie, Love Me Tender, on December 28, 1956. The sisters attended the movie, but never returned home. It would become one of the oldest and most haunting cold case murder investigations in Chicago history. Details regarding the disappearance and murders of Barbara and Patricia have been discussed and picked apart for decades. Some information is completely different depending on the source. There are several times where we will discuss the alternate information or events as they may have happened.
You can support this podcast by joining the Corrupt Crew over on Patreon or making a one-time donation through PayPal. Both links are in the episode notes.
Christmas is not too far away. If you're not following us on the socials, what are you waiting for? We have a holiday surprise planned for December. More information to come. But if you don't want to miss out, check out our Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, TikTok, Threads. The list goes on and on.
Loretta and Joseph Grimes married young and had 7 children together before divorcing in 1951. Shirley was born in 1926, Leona in 1928, Teresa in 1939, Barbara in 1941, Joseph or Joey in 1942, Patricia in 1943, and James in 1945.
This is our first instance of alternative information. Usually the family is listed as having 6 children. Sometimes the boys are combined into Joseph James as one person, and other times Teresa is just left off. A little digging found a 1940 Chicago consensus that Loretta had completed. At that time, she listed her occupation as a housewife with 3 children at home. That should have been Shirley, Leona, and Teresa. We also know that 17-year-old Teresa and 14-year-old Joey waited at the bus stop in December 1956, but James was only 11 years old. Based on our research, we believe that Joseph and Loretta Grimes had 7 children.
By 1956, Joseph was remarried and working as a truck driver, and Loretta was a clerk for a pharmaceutical company, Park Davis. Loretta was a hard worker, but as a single mother, the financial situation wasn't ideal. Loretta and the younger children lived at 3634 South Damon Avenue in Chicago, Illinois.
The McKinley Park neighborhood where the family lived was in the center of Chicago. It was a tight-knit community of mostly Irish Americans. The oldest daughter, Shirley, had moved out, and Leona, the second oldest, had married, had a son, and then died from an illness 2 years previously in 1954.
Was this Leona that died or her son?
Leona died.
Okay.
Barbara was 15 years old and attending Thomas Kelly High School. Patricia was 12 years old and attending St. Maurice Rowan Catholic Elementary School. The girls were huge Elvis Presley fans. And when the Elvis movie Love Me Tender was released on November 15th, 1956, they went to the theater 10 times to see that movie.
Twilight, I went and saw 8 times in the theater.
You saw Twilight 8 times in the theater? Wow.
Maybe 6 of them was by myself. I would go to the theater for Twilight, yes. I did that. That was me.
What about New Moon, Eclipse, Breaking Dawn?
It wasn't as much. Twilight was just like, it was a big deal at that time for me because I had read the books and I was
It was huge.
That I was just so dedicated to that one. I don't know why. It's like because they first meet and, the rest is history. It's not my favorite one, I would say, but I still went to it.
Back then, I don't think it was as cringeworthy as it is now. Now I watch it and I'm like, ugh, all the awkward staring.
It is so cringy now.
Back then, It was it was kind of like Harry Potter. Like everybody was waiting in line to get the Harry Potter books. Everybody, like when the Twilight books came out, it was a big deal.
If you could see my face staring at the theater screen, it would be like, my eyes would sparkle. Compared to now, I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
The acting is it's too hard to watch.
Well, just 3 days before Patricia's 13th birthday, the girls begged Loretta for permission to go to the movies to see a double feature of Love Me Tender. This would be the 11th and 12th time seeing the movie. Loretta had originally told the girls no on going to the movies. Barbara had been sick earlier that week and still had a cough. The forecast called for light snow and a low temperature of 20 degrees that night. The girls were on Christmas break from school, and eventually Loretta did agree to allow them to see the double feature of Love Me Tender.
On Friday, December 28th, 1956, the family had dinner at their home. At 7:30 p.m., Barbara and Patricia set off for the Brighton Theater, located at 4223 South Archer Avenue. The theater was located just a mile and a half from the home. Loretta sent them with $2.50. This was for movie tickets, concessions, and possibly round-trip bus fare. Barbara was wearing a yellow blouse over a gray tweed skirt, 3/4 length coat, and black ballerina shoes. Patricia left the house wearing a yellow sweater, blue jeans, a black jacket with white stripes, and black shoes. We don't know if Barbara and Patricia took the bus to the theater, but it's possible since the movie ticket for the second showing of Love Me Tender would have cost only 50 cents, so they should have had money to spare.
We know that Barbara and Patricia made it to the theater for the first showing of the movie. A classmate of Patricia's named Dorothy sat behind them during this. Dorothy and her younger sister left during intermission before the second showing of Love Me Tender at 9:30 p.m. They passed Barbara and Patricia in the concession line as the girls were waiting for popcorn. Dorothy reported that everything seemed normal and the girls looked happy. Dorothy didn't see anyone around them lurking or anything suspicious before she left the theater.
Love Me Tender runs 1 hour and 29 minutes. Assuming the first movie ran from 8 to 9:30, with a 10 to 20 minute intermission, the second feature should have been over by 11:10 or 11:20 p.m.
Have you seen that movie?
I am not a big Elvis fan. Have you seen this movie?
Never seen it.
Patricia and Barbara were such big Elvis fans that they were in the fan club and everything. They loved Elvis, which for 1950s is pretty on par.
I mean, he was a good-looking guy.
Elvis was like our Twilight.
Yeah. We're relating Elvis to a vampire. He sparkled.
One sparkles, one has nice hair.
Elvis sparkled with all those bedazzled jewels on his suit.
Oh, see, there you go. They both sparkle.
There you go.
When Barbara and Patricia didn't return by midnight, Loretta knew something wasn't right. The youngest Grimes sibling, 11-year-old James, was already asleep, so Loretta sent 17-year-old Teresa and Joey, who was 14 years old, to the bus stop to wait for the girls. Teresa and Joey sat through 3 bus stops, but Barbara and Patricia didn't show up, and they were forced to return home.
Along the way, Teresa and Joey saw a police officer and reported that their sisters should have been home by now. The officer told them that Barbara and Patricia were probably just out with their boyfriends and would be home soon. Loretta called Barbara and Patricia's friends, hoping that the girls had decided to go home with a friend, but no one had heard from either of the sisters.
Loretta wasted no time. She called the police by 2 a.m. on December 29th. Hundreds of police officers began the search for the Grimes sisters. An entire task force was created to handle the intensive search for the girls. The Illinois State Police and the FBI also became involved. The Brighton Park area was canvassed by police. 15,000 missing posters were hung, and the Catholic Church put up a $1,000 reward for information. During the investigation, over 300,000 Chicago residents were questioned. To this day, the search for Barbara and Patricia is the most number of man-hours spent on a missing persons case in Chicago history.
There were multiple sightings of Barbara and Patricia. Joseph Smock, who was a CTA bus driver, thought the girls had departed from his bus at the corner of Archer and Western at 11:05 p.m. Another classmate of Patricia thought she saw Patricia walk by with two girls she didn't know the following evening around 6:30 p.m. On the early morning of December 29th, security guard Jack Franklin reported that he might have offered Barbara and Patricia directions.
Newspapers like the Chicago Tribune picked up the case, providing updates and pleas for information on Barbara and Patricia's whereabouts. The Chicago Tribune even printed a full-color article showing exactly the clothing the girls had been wearing when they disappeared. Days later, on January 1st, 1957, another CTA bus driver stated that the girls were passengers on his Damon Avenue route.
A night clerk at the Unity Hotel reported that he refused a hotel room to the sisters at approximately 9 p.m. on January 2nd. Why would you refuse a hotel room to two young girls when it's freezing cold out?
Absolutely.
The following day, 3 employees at the Kresge discount store saw Barbara and Patricia. These employees reported that the girls had stood at the record counter listening to Elvis albums. Columnist Ann Landers received an anonymous letter with a tip on the sisters' disappearance. A portion of the letter reads,
"Outside the show, we all got to talking, and we exchanged phone numbers. When we got to the street where we turned off, we said goodbye and we ran across the street. Then Betty forgot something she had to tell Barbara, and we ran back to the corner. A man about 22 or 25 was talking to them. He pushed Barbara into the back seat of the car and Pat in the front seat. We got part of the license number as the car drove by us. The first 4 numbers are 2184. Betty thinks there were 3 or 4 numbers after that. When we heard they were missing, we didn't know what to do."
Police followed up on the letter, but they were unable to locate the writer or the vehicle involved.
At some point in the investigation, the police began to suspect that Barbara and Patricia were just runaways. The search had been extensive, without turning up any signs of the girls in Chicago, and the community began to wonder if the sisters had just run away. Elvis was their idol, so maybe they had boarded a bus and headed to Memphis. Elvis actually got involved to plead with the girls to come home, saying on the radio station and TV, "If you're good Presley fans, you'll go home and ease your mother's worries."
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, Elvis. I Googled what a hound dog was. I Googled it because I know the song, of course, but I was like, what does he mean by you ain't nothing but a hound dog? And so I looked it up and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much Elvis in this statement here. So that's what I said it. No, just kidding. I'm sure his heart was in it, but it just wasn't a very well thought out statement, I would say, on his part.
No, I think it had good intentions.
Mm-hmm.
If the girls had actually run away. Like, he must have been very certain that they had run away. Unfortunately, that's not the outcome. So it's kind of a poor statement to make.
Do you think part of the reason why this is like one of the biggest unsolved cases in Chicago is because of Elvis, how he made a statement on it, how there was so many people that joined in on this investigation, how many police officers there were?
By the time Elvis made his statement, I think the ball was really already rolling here. Like, there was already 15,000 flyers hung by kids that went to school with both girls. The community really jumped into action here to help them.
Okay.
And as we're going to discuss in a little bit, this isn't the first set of children to go missing within a year in Chicago. So it was all hands on deck. Let's try and find these girls. Loretta was positive that the girls had not run away, but that they had been kidnapped. She pointed out that they were 15 years old and 12 years old. It was December, and they didn't have other clothes to wear, and they also didn't have any money.
On January 12th, Loretta was escorted by the FBI from Chicago to Milwaukee by following the directions in a ransom letter. Loretta had been instructed to sit in a Catholic church with $1,000 cash on the pew next to her. Barbara was supposed to come pick up the money at the church, give it to the kidnapper, and return with Patricia. This letter turned out to be a hoax, and the author was eventually tracked down to a patient at a mental hospital.
On January 14th, Wallace and Ann Tolston received 2 phone calls to their home, one at midnight and then a second at 12:15 a.m. The Tolstons' daughter Sandra went to school with Patricia. When the first call was received at their house, Mr. Tolston answered the phone, but hung up after no one spoke. Then 15 minutes later, Mrs. Tolston answered the call. This time, a young girl said,
"Is that you, Sandra? Is Sandra there?"
before hanging up the phone. The family was convinced that Patricia had been the one to make those phone calls.
The next day, a switchboard operator for the Chicago Central Police Complaint Room received a strange phone call from a man who reported that Barbara and Patricia's bodies were at the Santa Fe Park. The caller said that he knew this because of a dream he had. The police were able to trace the call back to Green's Liquor Market or bar and a man named Walter Kranz. Walter was brought in for questioning, but after Walter explained that he came from a family of psychics and police determined he wasn't a viable lead, he was released again.
From January 9th to the 16th, the Chicago area was hammered by a snow and ice storm. Almost 12 inches of snow fell during that period, which delayed the search for the girls. On Tuesday, January 22nd, 1957, the search for Barbara and Patricia Grimes came to a sad end. 39-year-old Leonard Prescott was driving on German Church Road when he saw what he thought were mannequins lying on the side of the road.
Leonard went to pick up his wife, Marie, to show her the mannequins, then returned to the German Church Road location. It wasn't mannequins, but the naked bodies of 15-year-old Barbara and 12-year-old Patricia. The sight of the girls upset Marie so much that Leonard had to carry her back to the car.
Here we have another variation in the events. Leonard may initially have seen the bodies behind a guardrail, or he could have seen them over the side of a bridge, in a ditch, or lying on the side of the road. I would assume since Leonard saw the girls just by driving by, they were fairly close to the roadway and over the guardrail. That makes the most sense.
Have you seen the photos? There's photos online of this. I wasn't expecting it to be out there, but yeah, it was very, very disturbing to see.
It is very sad. And it does look like, to me anyways, it looks like their bodies are right there. Because some of the stories makes it sound like it's a ditch that's like way off the road, or it's over the side of this bridge, when to me it looks like they're like right there and their bodies would have been covered by the snow.
Leonard and Marie rushed to Willow Springs Police Station to report finding the 2 bodies. Oh yeah, they don't have phones.
Valid point.
The temperatures on January 21st and 22nd had been warmer, around 50 degrees. Investigators believe this had caused the snow covering the sisters to thaw and Leonard to see their bodies from the road.
The Chicago Police Department had originally taken the lead while the girls were missing. Now the jurisdiction changed when their bodies were found in an unincorporated area, and the Cook County Coroner's Office took the lead. The first officer on the scene was Cook County Sheriff Deputy William Mitchell. He contacted the coroner office, and the chief investigator for the Cook County Coroner's Office, Harry Gloss, arrived at the scene quickly. Sheriff Joseph Lohman also arrived at the scene early on.
160 officers from Chicago Police Departments, Cook County Departments, the Forest Preserves, and 5 South Chicago Police Departments responded to the scene. Law enforcement weren't the only people at the scene. Reporters also arrived, and before long, cars were parked bumper to bumper along the rural road. Unfortunately, with over 200 people, the scene was not preserved, and evidence was likely lost. Today, this would have been handled differently, but at the time, it was all hands on deck with 160 officers attempting to help find evidence. Imagine how Loretta must have felt when her 2 daughters were found murdered and over 200 people decided to show up and surround her babies in that manner. Being a mom, I've tried to imagine it honestly, I have, but I have to stop myself because it puts me in a terrible mental state of feeling completely helpless. That mother deserved her babies to be shielded, guarded, and protected at that moment, yet they weren't, and I feel that situation shattered her.
For the rest of her life, she does seem to blame herself for something that was clearly not her fault. She was doing what all parents do. At some point, you have to let them go to the movies. You have to let them leave the house. The other really tragic thing here is that Joseph, Barbara and Patricia's dad, was brought to the scene and he identified them. And again, this is not something that we would do today. A parent would never come to the crime scene to see his daughters lying there. Obviously, he did positively identify them, but it's not something he should have seen.
Do you know if they contacted him for sure, or was it word around town? Because obviously there was over like 200 people there.
I think he arrived with law enforcement. Like they were trying to get him to identify the bodies to see, hey, do we need to stop the search? Is this Barbara and Patricia? But he literally falls to his knees and is just inconsolable, as any parent would be.
Yeah.
From law enforcement's perspective, they had been looking for these girls for so long, and I think they wanted to be there to help. But it really did hamper the investigation later because you've got 200 sets of feet stomping on things. And the reporters, they're not trained to even look where they're walking. So evidence so very quickly was lost.
I know Joseph was only the one that was there at the scene, but even the thought of it is overwhelming to me. Just thinking of your children there, fully exposed, murdered, and over 200 people are around just seeing their dead bodies.
Yeah, taking pictures that are still online all these years later.
Yeah, exactly.
Barbara was laying on her left side, with her legs slightly drawn up and her arms up. Patricia's body was lying on top of Barbara's head and shoulder. Patricia was lying flat on her back, but her head was turned to the right at a strange angle. Her nose was possibly broken, and there were 3 wounds to her abdomen. One of the girls had triangle-shaped marks, possibly from an ice pick or similar device, on their chest. Both girls were naked and had bruises to their faces. Just beyond their bodies was a 15-foot drop-off that led to a creek called Devil's Creek.
The girls were wrapped in white sheets and taken to the coroner offices to thaw and be identified by their father, Joseph Grimes. Autopsies were performed by 3 pathologists, but a cause and time of death would be hard to determine. The official cause of death was declared to be from secondary shock from exposure to low temperatures.
Basically, this means that the girls possibly froze to death, but we're not sure of the exact cause.
And real quick, just to clarify, Joseph went to the crime scene to identify them, and then he also went to the coroner's office.
Yeah, he was in charge of identifying them more than once. It's horrible.
So not only do you have to see them dead once, but you have to see them dead again.
Maybe he was so heartbroken that he wasn't able to formally identify them at the scene, but he was there.
The coroner determined that the physical assault on both girls wouldn't have been enough to kill them. There was no clear cause of death for the sisters, and the bruising was determined to have been due to post-mortem damage by animals. The coroner did determine that it was a homicide. Both girls were laid in a way that would have not been a natural death from hypothermia.
It is estimated that the girls had died within 4 hours of their disappearance. This is based on the contents of their stomachs. Their clothes have never been found, and their bodies were clean, like someone had wiped them down clean. 2 blouses, a sweater, and a belt were found in the wooded area, but Loretta determined that they were not Barbara or Patricia's. Again, we have some unverified information. Barbara is typically reported as having sex before her death, but it's not documented if it was consensual or not. We also don't know if this means right before her death or if she had just been a sexually active teenager.
Harry Gloss, the chief investigator of the coroner's office, disagreed with the pathologist's initial report. In fact, Harry disagreed so strongly with the findings that he held a press conference at his own home. Harry said that both girls have clearly been raped and there was no animal damage, but the sisters had probably been beaten to death. Based on a layer of ice on the girls, he felt that they had still had enough body heat to thaw the snow around them for a short time before more snow fell on them. He estimated their bodies had been left possibly back on December 29th, and a large snowfall had covered their bodies.
Harry Gloss was fired due to these statements. He was asked to retract them, but he refused. The sheriff became involved to deputize Harry so he could continue working on the case, but without pay. The sheriff also agreed that the girls were beaten and raped by a predator. The coroner's office would publicly confirm that Barbara had been sexually active before her death, but they had been hoping to keep the information back to identify the killer. In turn, they accused Harry Gloss of being publicity mad.
Exactly 1 month after their trip to the theater, Barbara and Patricia were laid to rest at Holy Sepulchre Cemetery. A 45-minute funeral procession drove by Grimes' home, Kelly High School, and St. Maurice Elementary. The wake had begun on Friday and lasted the weekend with hundreds of people paying their respects to the 2 closed white caskets.
Although it was 3 days before Patricia's birthday, she's frequently listed as 13 years old because it's unknown if she died before or after her birthday. The murders of Barbara and Patricia were the second kidnapping and murder of Chicago children in a year. In October 1955, 14-year-old Robert Peterson, 13-year-old John Schuessler, and his 11-year-old brother Anton also disappeared, this time after going to the Monte Cristo bowling alley. Just 2 days later, their naked bodies were found. We'll come back to this one in a later episode, but almost 40 years later in 1994, Kenneth Hansen would be arrested for the murder of the Schuessler-Peterson boys. The Chicagoland area was on red alert after 2 separate sets of children were killed within a year.
Back to the investigation of the Grimes sisters. Of the 300,000 people who were questioned by police, 2,000 of those were seriously interrogated as suspects. The first person brought in for questioning was 53-year-old Walter Kranz. Walter was the psychic who was traced to the liquor store or bar. The bodies of the sisters were found less than a mile from the location Walter said their bodies would be. Walter was brought in a second time for questioning.
He would be held for 5 days and complete 2 polygraph tests. He showed some concerning connections to the sisters. When asked if he had seen the sisters alive, Walter responded that he hadn't, but the test indicated a deception. A 7-year-old girl also told law enforcement that Walter had cut her hair from behind while she was at a movie theater. A ransom note asking for $5,000 to be left in a locker was also connected to Walter. A handwriting expert thought the handwriting on the note was Walter's, but they just didn't have enough evidence to arrest him, and Walter was released. In his own defense, he claimed that he was not involved, but just trying to help out as a psychic.
Well, A, he was at a movie theater, and B, he cut a 7-year-old girl's hair off. That all sounds suspicious right there.
Very suspicious.
Harry Gloss believed that a man named Edward Lee Benny Bedwell was the murderer. 21-year-old Benny was reported by police by 5 separate witnesses, including his employers, a diner customer, and a taxi driver on January 24th. According to John and Minnie Duros, Benny worked for them occasionally as a dishwasher in exchange for food and had been with 2 girls that resembled the sisters on December 30th.
John and Minnie told police that Benny, another man, and 2 girls had been at the diner around 5:30 a.m. on December 30th. One of the girls had a jacket with the name Pat embroidered on it and appeared to be either drunk, drugged, or sick. The group sat in the diner listening to Elvis on the jukebox, then went outside. The girl with the Pat jacket could hardly walk, and she came back inside to lay her head on the table. Benny and the other man picked the girl up, and the 4 of them left.
Benny admitted to being at the diner on the morning of December 30th with 2 girls, but according to him, this was a different set of sisters. How many sets does he need to be with? My God, Benny. Get it together.
A bunch of sisters that look the same, and also one has a jacket that says Pat on it.
I would think that would be confirmed from Loretta. Like if Patricia actually had a embroidered
Pat jacket.
Yeah. Sheriff Lohman felt that the girls in the diner would have been Barbara and Patricia for several reasons. One of the girls told Minnie that they were sisters and the height of the girls matched Barbara and Patricia. Benny also looked similar to Elvis with his haircut and sideburns. Sheriff Lohman suspected that Benny's appearance might have been enough for the girls to go with him, and Benny hadn't allowed them to leave alive.
Benny was interrogated for 3 days in a motel room before confessing to the murders on January 27, 1957. He signed a 14-page confession, admitting to himself and a friend, William Cole Willingham, spending time with the sisters between December 28th and January 7th. Benny was even taken to the crime scene and showed investigators what they had done to Barbara and Patricia.
As part of his confession, Benny said that he had taken the girls to West Madison Street bars, drinking for most of the time.
West Madison Street in Chicago is called Skid Row. People lined the curbs, just sitting and drinking all day, every day. It was a rough neighborhood with high crime and poverty.
When the girls had declined having sex with the men, he forced them to eat hot dogs and beat them both to death.
Loretta didn't believe for a second that Barbara and Patricia had run off with Benny and William. Loretta stated,
"It's a lie. My girls wouldn't be on West Madison Street. They didn't even know where it was. They're not looking for my daughters when they look in bars and hotels. My daughters wouldn't be on West Madison Street unless they were dragged or drugged."
The story was extremely upsetting for Loretta. Benny stated that he and William had sex with the girls on multiple occasions and took them to a bar where they were served as many as 8 rounds. Loretta pointed out that the girls were not physically mature for their age, and with Patricia being only 12, who would have served them alcohol at a bar, let alone the girls supposedly being able to consume that much alcohol?
William, Benny's friend, was brought in for questioning, but he denied having anything to do with the sisters' deaths. Benny would recant his story as well, saying that he had confessed because he thought the police would free him after his confession. Law enforcement investigated Benny's confession, but it just didn't line up. The girls had no alcohol in their system, and their stomachs didn't contain hot dogs. Benny had also been at work on December 28th at 4:19 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. on December 29th, when, according to the confession, Benny and William had murdered the girls. In front of reporters, Loretta approached Benny's mother in the courtroom to say that she believed he was innocent as well.
Benny was also illiterate, so he couldn't write the 14-page confession himself, and unfortunately, he had no idea what he was signing. Benny would be freed on a $20,000 bond on February 6, 1957, and eventually cleared of his involvement in Barbara and Patricia's deaths. As soon as Benny was cleared of the charges, he was arrested for charges from Florida for an assault of a 13-year-old girl from the prior year.
Just when we start to think Benny was innocent.
No, Benny was still up to shenanigans, just not shenanigans that have ever officially been connected to Barbara and Patricia.
Convicted murderer Charles Leroy Melquist was also a suspect. Almost 2 years after Barbara and Patricia's death, 15-year-old Bonnie Lee Scott's decapitated naked body was found less than 3/4 of a mile from where the Grimes sisters were found. Charles confessed to smothering Bonnie with a pillow by accident on September 22, 1958. Charles said that they had been horsing around when he grabbed the pillow but held it over Bonnie's face too long, and she had died.
Charles removed Bonnie's clothes and put her body over a guardrail, then pulled her 15 feet down an embankment. Just like Patricia Grimes, Bonnie's body was left lying on her back. He wasn't done, though. Charles returned to Bonnie multiple times. The first time, to convince himself that Bonnie really was dead. Then a month later, he returned with the intention to bury Bonnie, but he brought a 4-inch butcher knife and a pitchfork with him. Charles decapitated Bonnie, throwing her head 20 feet away, then using the knife to make cuts into Bonnie's torso.
Oh my.
It's a lot.
Why would you have the intention to go and bury her? But I'm going to bring a butcher knife and a pitchfork as well.
Oh, he's lying through his teeth. There's no way he had intentions of burying her with the stuff he brought with him.
Before his arrest, Loretta had received a phone call from an unknown man a day after Bonnie's disappearance. The caller told her,
"I've committed another perfect crime."
Loretta recognized the caller's voice as the same caller from approximately 18 months earlier. In the 1957 phone call, the man told Loretta that he was the one to undress the girls. The man had a distinctive laugh as he described how the smaller of the girls had crossed toes on both feet.
The smaller girl was actually Barbara. Even though she was 2 years older, she was physically smaller than Patricia, and she did have toes that crossed.
Loretta was convinced that the phone calls connected her daughters and Bonnie Lee Scott. Loretta wasn't the only one who saw Charles as a leading suspect. Paul Haletko, the chief medical officer of the State Welfare Department, said,
"I think that when the Grimes killer is found, he will be the same type of person as Charles Melquist."
Charles had been in the military for a short time, and he picked up a chokehold or pressure point knowledge that allowed him to knock women unconscious quickly. Several of Charles's girlfriends came forward to say that they had been kissing for a second, but then woke up and Charles was standing over them. This fits with Barbara, Patricia, and Bonnie's deaths, as all three could have been smothered.
If Charles had returned to the scene and tried to stab Patricia's body in December or January, her body would have been frozen and therefore much harder to stab, which could also account for the ice pick type stab wounds on her body.
Would the stabbing even be achievable when a body is frozen? I don't want to think of that, but I try to pry apart frozen burgers with a knife all the time and can never get those suckers apart.
Oh, my Lord. It's not the right thought process there, but... So the coroner had said that Patricia's body had stab wounds, possibly from an ice pick or similar, but those wounds were not deep enough to have killed her. So that makes me think if it was Charles, he could have gone back and tried to stab her, but her body, they said they had to take it to the coroner's office and let them thaw.
Yeah.
So it's possible he was not able to stab her at that point if he went back. Versus Bonnie, that was September, October. It would have been a lot more gruesome, but she definitely wouldn't have been frozen.
And also, how long does it take a human body to completely freeze, in temperatures like that? Depending on when he would have came back to the scene, their bodies could have been not fully frozen, but he could have still punctured something maybe.
Well, and that's a thought too, they were supposed to be completely covered by the snow, and that's why they weren't seen from the roadway. So he would have had to have almost come back fairly quickly. And there's no shoe prints in the snow, someone had recently been there either.
Weird.
Charles was a suspect in the 1957 investigation, but never charged. He had connections to the mob and connection to the lead investigator in the Grimes sisters case. It's been long assumed that he was the murderer, but it was covered up. He would serve 8 years of his 99-year sentence for the murder of Bonnie Lee Scott.
Are you freaking kidding me?
Nope.
8 years of a 99-year sentence. And what freaking lead investigator? Did they know his connections at this time? Or was this later found out and they were oh yeah, maybe we shouldn't have let him go?
They knew his connections at the time. I searched high and low trying to figure out in what world would a man that has been sentenced to 99 years be let out in 8 years? And there is no information. You cannot find anything other than, yep, he served his time and he was released. And they just always word it within 8 years.
He had to have had a very strong connection.
Some kind of cover up here.
Yeah. 17-year-old Max Fleeg was considered a suspect, and even though it was illegal for a minor to complete a polygraph test, a test was still forced on Max. He failed the polygraph and confessed to the murder. After it was determined that the polygraph test was inadmissible in court, Max recanted his confession. Without a true confession or evidence, Max was cleared and the investigation continued. Just a year later, when Max was 18 years old, he would be sentenced to life in prison for murdering a 14-year-old girl with a rolling pin. This is what I'm talking about. These suspects, they're getting blamed, they're getting pointed fingers at them, they take them to jail, and they're like, oh, they're cleared for some reason, and they go off and kill somebody else or do something else that's bad.
They were on the right thought process with interviewing these guys because you don't know what other charges, what other criminal backgrounds these guys had. Like, what was Max up to prior to the Grimes sisters disappearing and being murdered? And then, obviously, a year later, he's killed a teenager. So he obviously had some criminal background there that we don't know about, but the police were looking into him closely. There is a common theme here, though.
For sure.
The next suspect to discuss is 25-year-old Barry Cook. Barry was suspected of 7 murders in the 1950s. The first murder was of Margaret Gallagher in Lincoln Park, known as the spyglass murder because a man from a nearby apartment saw Margaret's murder through field glasses. This witness identified Barry as the murderer. Barry was also connected to 15-year-old Judith Mae Anderson, the Grimes sisters, and the Schuessler-Peterson boys. Barry was convicted of none of these murders, but he was sentenced to Illinois State Penitentiary for 7 charges of assault and 1 of assault to commit rape. He was given polygraph tests for Margaret, but Barry failed. In 1959, Barry was tried for Margaret's murder, but found innocent. He would serve 9 years before being released in 1967 and moving to Texas with his family. Since the 1994 arrest of Kenneth Hansen, we know that Barry was not connected to the Schuessler-Peterson murders.
It was an opinion of the police officers at the time that the girls may have been abducted or lured by someone they knew for a white slavery ring and taken straight to the woods in Willow Springs. The officers believed that the girls refused to become prostitutes and were strangled. Investigating that the girls may have been lured away by someone they knew, law enforcement decided they should look at teenage boys next.
15-year-old Ed Lorden and 17-year-old Earl Zastro had seen 2 girls jumping out of doorways and giggling at 11:30 p.m. on December 28th. Ed and Earl had reported the sighting right away, saying that they thought it was the Grimes sisters. With law enforcement switching gears to look at teenage boys, both Ed and Earl were questioned in the murders of the girls. Earl was pulled out of school multiple times, sometimes threatened, and other times with attempted bribery to confess. Earl's father sold dairy products, and the police accused the boys of using one of the freezers to hide the bodies.
Leonard and Marie Prescott, the married couple who found the sisters' bodies, were questioned by the police and their home was searched. The police went room by room, even searching through the cabinets for anything to connect Leonard and Marie to the murders. Nothing was found, but this went on for several months. The pathologists thought poison might have been the cause of death for Patricia and Barbara. Dr. Jerry Kearns of St. Elizabeth Hospital said,
"He used a method which we are unable to detect. Perhaps he is a person trained in chemistry and with a knowledge of unusual poisons."
You know, I'm starting to think no one in this field at that time trying to find the Grimes sisters' murderer took training seriously. If it was poison, they would have clearly found it.
I would assume it should have still been in their system because they were frozen solid.
Yes. So why it's a guess? They're like, oh yeah, they could have been poisoned, but we couldn't detect it.
It's not detectable, so they must have a knowledge of unusual poisons. That's clearly the best answer.
Yeah. They need more training.
It's 1957. The murderer clearly had a knowledge of chemistry, unusual poisons. Case closed.
It's also just as possible that Barbara and Patricia accepted a ride from someone they didn't know and were kidnapped. The story of the Grimes sisters became a cautionary tale. It changed Chicago. Children were no longer allowed to stay out after dark. Some local children weren't even allowed to see movies at the Brighton Theater.
The Chicago Tribune asked readers to send in their theories, and the Tribune would pay $50 if the theory was published. Another newspaper, the Sun-Times, went shopping with Loretta to showcase the type of clothes the girls had been wearing. Photos were taken of the models wearing the clothes and published in the paper. Alongside the photos was a request for help in locating the girls' missing clothing as evidence to help solve the case.
In 1962, a Los Angeles man confessed to the murders. Alfred Lawless had details of the case that no one else seemed to know, including that Barbara's toes were crooked and the clothes they were wearing. He asked the girls if they wanted to go for hamburgers, but once they were in the car, he drove them to the country. He was unsure of the exact details, but he remembered taking their clothes and leaving them in the snow. Alfred also confessed to killing a man in 1947 or 1948 in Jamestown, California. Alfred was never convicted, and we couldn't find any additional information on why Alfred is no longer considered a suspect.
In my opinion, I think the girls spent all of their money on tickets and concessions and then didn't have a way home except to walk. These are teenagers. Barbara was wearing a skirt and it was 20 degrees. I believe that they accepted a ride from a stranger or possibly someone they vaguely knew. On the other hand, this was their 11th and 12th time seeing Love Me Tender in 6 weeks, so it might have been easy to watch their routine and target them to kidnap.
So the suspect, Charles Melquist, it was stated that he had connections to cover up these murders. I just have a sinking feeling that the lead investigator could have been someone from the coroner's office. It's my theory, it's probably not right, but Charles seemed like a man who wanted credit for his murders without being caught. We see it in the murder of Bonnie. He killed her, set her body where he wanted it, but when it didn't get reported or noticed, he went back and decapitated her. If the pathologist initially thought the girls died from exposure, Charles would have been angry. So he tells his connection to get his ass out there and open the can of worms that it was a homicide. I mean, in the back of my mind, it's like, it's telling me it was gloss.
You think Harry was the one that was covering up for him?
I have a suspicion about it.
No way. He worked unpaid. Like, he literally got fired, and the sheriff brings him back in, and he works unpaid.
I know. And then I read that he, drew pictures for hospital children. And then I'm like, I had to take that theory and break it down a little bit more, because I'm like, I can't just point fingers at Harry, but it's in the back of my mind. And I don't want to say it's him, but it could be someone like him in that area of expertise, whether it's the coroner's office or a law enforcement person. All in all, I think Charles is the one that did it with the help of his connections. Obviously, I have other theories, but we don't got time for that.
The thing with Harry as well is that he was the first investigator to come forward and say, no, the girls have been raped. The coroner's office, and that's part of the reason he gets fired, is because the coroner's office did not want that information released because they thought it was going to tarnish the girls' reputation, that the family had basically been through enough. And so when asked about it, they lie. The coroner's office lies and says, nope, no sexual assault here. Well, that did not actually help the investigation at all.
But wasn't Harry the chief?
Harry was the one saying, listen, they were beaten to death. They were sexually assaulted. He's out there from the very beginning just saying, hey, I understand that they're 15 and 12, but if we're going to solve this, people need to know the facts. To him, I think it was more fact driven. And to the coroner's office, they were looking at it like, oh my gosh, we can't, ruin anyone's reputation. There's a reputation to ruin. This is not the girl's fault at all, right? Now we look at this from a very different perspective than they looked at it in 1956, 1957. Now we think we want to catch that bastard who did this. Regardless of what the facts are, we need the facts in order to catch the wrongdoer. And I think that our man probably slipped through the cracks there. I really do. I also think that Charles is probably most likely the person. I agree with that. The distinctive laugh, the phone call, his pressure points, and the girlfriend's that's freaking terrifying. You're kissing him and then the next second you're waking up and he's standing over you.
Yeah, that's trauma.
Sheriff Lohman believed that Benny Bedwell was the murderer until his death in 1969. Harry Gloss died in 1994, but his theory was also Benny Bedwell, expanding to say that the girls' wounds or cause of deaths were not investigated as they should have been.
The case went cold, and both parents would pass away without answers. Joseph died on June 19, 1965. Loretta passed away on December 8, 1989, at 83 years old. James Grimes told the Chicago Tribune in a 2013 interview,
"It bothers me, especially around Christmas time and the holidays. I always wonder if they were alive today, how many nieces and nephews would I have? I just assumed it was never going to be solved, but maybe there's hope."
The Back of the Yards Neighborhood Council and St. Maurice Church raised more than $20,000 for the Grimes family. This went to paying off of Loretta's $7,800 mortgage, and the rest was put into a trust fund. The house was also completely remodeled by a construction company and volunteers. Students at Kelly High School came together to write Teresa Grimes a check for a $503 donation.
In 2013, retired police officer Ray Johnson and a group of amateur sleuths picked up the case to review at the location of the McKinley Park Library. Ray had become interested after stumbling upon Barbara and Patricia's story while researching Chicago's history in 2010. Ray continues working on the case, including holding a presentation in 2019. Ray's opinion is that Charles Melquist is the murderer. To Ray, he agrees that the 2 phone calls Loretta received were in fact from Charles Melquist.
Dating back to the 1950s, police have received numerous calls about a black sedan on German Church Road that mysteriously disappears. Some report seeing the black sedan idling on the side of the road where Barbara and Patricia's bodies were left. Once spotted, the car disappears suddenly. Other witnesses only hear a vehicle idling, the creak of the car door opening, the sound of something hitting the ground, and then the door shuts and the car drives away.
There's no statute of limitations for murder, and this is an open case. The family continues to wait for answers. If you have any information on Barbara and Patricia's death, you can report it to the Cook County Sheriff Office. We'll list the website in our episode notes. We want to hear from you. What do you think happened to Barbara and Patricia? Send us an email at corruptpod@gmail.com, add a comment to this episode, or reach out on any one of our socials. We would love for you to become part of the Corrupt crew. You can find us on Patreon with multiple tiers and PayPal. This will score you our appreciation and will announce your name in a future episode. Both links are in the episode notes. Case suggestions and feedback can be emailed to us at corruptpod@gmail.com.
The sources for this episode would be listed in the episode notes. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our new Corrupt content. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this episode. Bye!
Bye!